Welcome everyone. It's a TBH Podcast. I've got a fantastic guest on today. Anuradha Kowtha. I've been waiting for the interview for a while. Anuradha, will you please just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Anuradha. We talked about that last time. Yeah, and I use I'm non-binary, so I use pronouns they, them. And a little bit about me, I started my business, the Cota Constellation, a few years ago. But who I am, I'm a human, I'm a parent, I'm a partner, I'm someone who's disabled and queer. I have so many identities, but the main thread of everything I've done in my life goes down to how capitalism and colonialism have shaped us, shape what we do in the world, how we work, and how do we get free from that programming.
What was the first time that you felt this impacted on you? What brought you to this point?
Of thinking about post capitalism.
Post-capitalist workplace, absolutely.
The post capitalist workplace has probably been evolving for a number of years. I think I finally wrote it down to paper and started my own podcast with that title around this time last year, to be honest. But it has been something on my mind for a long time.
What help me understand what brought you to that point? What made you want to write it down and begin the change?
I think there's so many reasons, and we could probably spend hours dissecting it all. But I think the I worked in a lot of industries. I was the teacher first right out of school. I was a researcher as well in biology labs. I've done so many other kinds of things. And when I came here, I actually came to the UK to do my PhD. Didn't end up doing it, but that, like I said, that thread has always been thinking about capitalism. And as I started my consultancy about 14 years ago, I pondered so many things, and a lot of my work then was post capitalism individually, one to one. And I really wanted to say, I want to have a bigger impact working with organizations so they can actually be different. And I just, how do I explain different? It's like, how can they, core tenet of all of this is we all deserve delightful experiences. And and I think we don't get that, especially if people have marginalized identities. Meaning, if we're disabled, and I have a disabled partner, I myself am disabled and I'm neurodivergent. So when I go around in the world, from everywhere from the NHS or from medical systems that are steeped in medical misogyny, medical racism, ableism, it's not a delightful experience. It's a traumatic experience, even trying to get the help I need. Going into the workplace and having to mask and hide my disability, hide my mental health things just to get through the day. And I would have almost no energy when I got home from work. I would be so exhausted because of the way my disability was, right? And having to mask my mental health and pretend like I didn't have anything going on just to fit in was also tiring. I was like, that's not the kind of workplace I want to work in. So always having to be different. And it's kind of like this double-edged sword with neurodivergent people in particular, where if we show our feelings, oh, we don't like those feelings. If we, and so then that's too much. And then if we hide our feelings, we're like seen as cold or, right. And especially that kind of angry brown woman, angry black woman, that we're, me saying it, people tend to be threatened, even if I'm saying it in a really gentle, mild way. So, like all these, I can't escape from how people interpret my identity and how that shows up in the workplace.
Interesting. I mean, what I have seen is that there's in some of the companies I work with, there's well-meaning, efforts to be diverse. There's well-meaning inclusion initiatives, but to be honest with you, they seem clumsy at times.
Yeah.
How does a business manage historically, as you say, marginalised employees because and they're in this modern workplace that is trying, but it always feels clumsy. What would you like the employer to do or the other employees to do?
I think one of the central tenets to that is create, there's a lot of good work in thinking, but we also need to build, to implement, to, right? Not just go beyond the kind of superficial changes of like, oh, people putting, pronouns in their bio or something like that, right? Those are important things. I'm not saying don't do them, but they're not very deep. The deeper work, I think, needs to come from a participatory model where we're co designing together. So that means we have to give up this idea of, I need to. So the modern workplace, I think, is very much profit centered and is focused on the bottom line, but also hierarchical. So certain people make the decisions. And if we look at the CEOs or directors or whatever, just like in media, just like our lawmakers, it's mainly, right, a certain type of person, white, middle-aged, able-bodied, cis, heterosexual men, making all of the decisions. So we actually, and that's not to say anything wrong with them. I mean, right? That's not the issue. The issue is then when we're thinking of marginalized employees, or I just gave a talk at a conference for disabled people, blind and visually impaired people. They need to be in the design process instead of getting tech that doesn't work for them, instead of having these experiences where people who are gay or trans can't be themselves at their workplace. They can't even use the bathrooms. Trans people right now can't use the bathrooms without fear right now. That's not a place that they can thrive and do their best work, right? So we actually need to bring them into the decision making process. And that takes a lot of courage. Yep, go ahead.
Interesting now, because I worked with a large company, a PLC company, and they've got a disabled lady joining them.
Yeah.
And they were in a 6, 7 story building, lifts. So they set about lowering all the buttons on the lift so she could have access. And they must have included her in the conversation. She says, "No, no, no. If you just get me a dobber with a ball on, I can reach it." So they were going to spend thousands on lowering lifts, but she just wanted a dobber with a ball on, and it wasn't until they asked her that actually that. So
Yeah, actually, and I want to make a point of what you're saying. Most of the accessibility changes are cheap and easy to implement. Most studies show less than $500 US dollars to fix some of these problems. So they're cheap. They're often less about buying an item. It might be buying a piece of equipment or something. And remember, disabled kit costs more. A typical keyboard is only 20 pounds, but a keyboard that is with bigger numbers or high contrast is like 80 to 100 at minimum. So you're covering the cost of that. But also, you making the change might be an attitude change, right? Of letting people have a virtual meeting without the camera on and not meaning something bad, right? Like that could be I've heard that asked for many times in this work. That doesn't cost anything.
probably that stick with the dobber on was probably £10. No more than that.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's a win-win, right?
How do teams start treating accessible issues as not as an obligation? How would it be just part of innovation in a business? What's your experience? How should they tackle that?
Can you ask the question in a different way?
So I'm trying to understand. I've been in these meetings. Whatever the challenges that other persons or the group of people are saying, it feels like it's an obligation to tackle their problem. But really, if we looked at it from the other end of the spectrum of regard, let's be innovative. Let's not see it as an obligation. Let's not see them as the problem, as which I often see. Um, so how could a business what's your recommendation of people to look at it through the other lens? How would that change their view of the world?
I mean, the evidence is out there and it speaks for itself. Higher profitability for companies that bring in diverse talent, the decision making is better, the outcomes are better, the results are higher, there is more innovation because and we're not then also opening ourselves up for lawsuits or other kinds of PR fiascos where we've done something that is racial, like not culturally sensitive, or harmful to the disabled or trans community, for instance. So we're actually, more voices are in the room. So we're not making silly decisions. We're making decisions that actually do innovate. And how do we do that? Well, I think the focus shouldn't be diversity first. The focus ought to be building psychological safety because most people don't feel comfortable to talk about some of the problems, or things like in let's say the complaints process, that we go through a complaints process and we're fobbed off. Like I just went through a a whole complaints process around accessibility and I was fobbed off. So that doesn't that doesn't make one feel psychologically safe. That puts more barriers up. So I think if we focused on building that safety within our team or with our clients or our end users or whoever we're talking about, and build that goodwill in, open the dialogue, being relational instead of thinking just about profit motive or just about, you know, how can we get, sell the most. If we actually open the lines of dialogue, there's probably solutions that are on the table that people have already thought about. Other companies have already implemented. We just need to open our arms to think about how we can personalize it for our needs.
Obviously, the existence of a business is to make a profit. Otherwise, it's not really a business. And you're saying that if they adapt to this mindset, they would be more profitable.
Plenty of evidence to show that. There's been study after study that shows this. Yeah.
What would I'll call it a post-capital workplace look and mean in practical terms? What might it look like? What might it feel like? What would it be day to day?
Well, let me give you an example of some work that I did. This is less about a business. This is in a government setting, but in the state of Colorado, I did some work for them, and basically they created a new department called the Department of Early Childhood, and it's a department focused on education, maternal health, and so on. Right, that especially in the early years. And so they wanted to bring in lived experience experts from, i.e., parents, caregivers, professionals in the community to feed back on the policy. And what they did is I helped write a proposal to the state legislature to pay them equitably for this information. And the impact has been all across the state in terms of, outcomes for websites being more accessible, for certain policy decisions where people have more fair access to things or whatever. This kind of thing shapes the whole state in terms of bringing people from different identities to the table to actually then feed back and say, hey, maternal health is suffering here. And then they can bring up maternal health statistics. As we know, they're very poor, especially for Black women in particular. So we can actually address that by bringing those people into the room. And then that shapes policy for everybody. It benefits not just Black women, but it benefits all maternal health in the state.
Well, I accept that was a great example of a government organisation, and government organisations are very different to businesses. I'm not saying that what they can't learn, but you talk about psychological safety,
Yeah.
and surely the challenge is when we live in a business culture that is built on competition and output. Um, The
Well,
owners will.
that's the current paradigm. Sorry, totally being ADHD and interrupting you. My apologies.
It's fine, and that's what I'm. That's the. We've got business owners listening to this podcast, and I want them to get a real grip of
Yeah.
it. So, you know, government bodies, I get it. They've
Yeah.
got probably more power over how they have their culture change. But in our world right now, we're in competition, we're in output, and usually output's measured in profit.
Yeah.
So I don't understand yet what psychological safety. What does it really mean in a business of the future? Let's go forward in the world. Let's go forward a few years and go. What does psychological safety look like in a business that's got to create a profit and be in competition with other businesses that have not invested in this? What would that business look like?
I think the current paradigm is basically what I'm trying to shift, that there needs to be an ultimate profit motive that comes from exploiting people. That's really what I'm saying. Does that mean we can't make a profit, but do we need to make a profit based on selling people's personal data? That's what the big companies are doing. Yeah, they might be profitable. They are making money. Yeah, but at what cost? Because at some point we won't be able to eat. We won't have fresh water. Like it's literally coming at the cost of people's lives. People can't eat. So I think there is plenty of ways we can shift that argument. So I worked with a company in the UK who is doing positive work. They have created some climate impact reports and so on, and they had me look at the accessibility of their website. So this makes it right. So currently on their website, at the time that I was doing this, it wasn't accessible to visually impaired people. It was the logic of the website, the organization of the website wasn't intuitive. This kind of thing, or like with nonprofits, yeah, maybe not for profits, but a lot of businesses are small or want profit, sure, but they're looking for fundraisers. They don't make the checkout process very streamlined and straightforward. I've looked at dozens of websites where the checkout page is not accessible to different people for different reasons. Not enough contrast. The screen reader can't read it. The language is unclear. They're using jargon. They're not being culturally sensitive. I've been to a zillion event pages, Eventbrite or whatever, and they've not put the time zone. It's at 12 o'clock. We're in an international market now. 12 o'clock in what time zone? Right? These are simple things. And if we have teams that are international, it makes sense to do that. Or where I have heard people use Sanskrit words like mantra or whatever, and those have a special meaning, but they'll just use it like it's an affirmation. I find that culturally incompetent and not safe for me. I've heard companies where they are saying, "Oh, let's move Diwali because it works better for the calendar, like the work calendar." So like these are small instances, but if we don't, it's not about not making a mistake, and it's not about having all the information. It's being willing to listen, be accountable, and start the dialogue from that point to say, how can we make this right? How can we look at this and actually change? That's the harder part. It's not, is it profitable or not? Or it's not about how. There's a lot of hows. I gave you a few little hows. But the thing is the willingness to do the internal work to show up differently as an organization, as a leader.
So you've worked stateside, you've worked in the UK. Is either country ahead of the other one, or are they even Stevens?
I've seen goods and bads in both places. I will say, up until the current administration in the U.S., I've seen where the ability to speak on race or being more aware of social justice more easy to talk about in the US. I think that dynamic of we have not actually dealt with the underlying hierarchical, capitalistic, colonial thinking, and that's coming to a head here and in the US. And it's bringing out the people who are ableist, who are racist, and so on, where those people are feeling emboldened right now. So
The
that's
leader, if
unfortunate.
a business, sorry, if there's a business leader listening right now, and they want to start that shift in the workplace culture, where would you advise them to begin? What's the first baby steps they should take?
I would say if they're a leader, because oftentimes what happens is it's the people who are not in power or have a little bit of power who approach me. But they know that their bosses or the people making the decisions or the people with the purse strings won't say yes to the work, right? So if you're a leader and you really want to make the change, then you need to be ready to do that internal work. And that means in the face of when someone's pointing these things out to you, to drop the defensiveness, to be open and willing to change. That is one of the most difficult phases that I think we go through. Once you can get through that phase, then, like I said, bringing in the stakeholders and starting an open dialogue is the next important step.
That's a good piece of advice. If the workplace was rebuilt from scratch, free from capitalism, hierarchy, colonial influence, what do you feel it would like to walk into it? What would it feel like in that business?
It would feel like people felt valued, not just for the labor that is paid, because in the current system, all this invisibilized labor is done by people that's not paid for, right? So they would feel like they could bring their whole selves to work. They know that they were valued. They'd feel delight, like excited that they are shaping something, right, in some way. And it's not like a bunch of jobs that we know we're just ticking over to keep making money on a graph. It would be actually meaningful stuff. A lot of the work around the world that is like around food, water, shelter. And these things have been historic. We still need those kinds of jobs, right? Even technology and innovation, there's room for those. I don't think we need to go back to like where we don't have any technology. There's plenty of scope for us to do it. And that, like I said, it's intersectional. Our approach is intersectional. We're trying, like organizations have gone to flat structures where there's not a key decision maker, it's many decision makers or having advisory boards, right? So it's that kind of idea of having participatory design, shared power structures, and more, we're deciding things together in a consensus.
You're right there, because the most innovative business I've seen have got a very flat structure, and who cares if it's a 21-year-old who's actually the right person to lead that project, that thing, or if it's a 65-year-old guy who's been there all his life. You're absolutely right. I've seen those structures really work, and the person that has got the real ability to lead, they step up, but they're very few and far between, in my experience, in the UK.